Good evening. I'm Greg Fenves, president of Emory University. And tonight I have the honor of welcoming you to the 39th annual Carter Town Hall, one of Emory's most special traditions. And I want to give a special welcome to all our first year students. I'm glad to share my first Carter Town Hall with you. Now, because we're committed to keeping everyone at Emory healthy, this year's Town Hall is being held virtually. But we are keeping the same basic format that's worked so well in past years, giving you, our first year students, the chance to ask in real time the questions that are on your mind. Now, in 1976, I was like you, my first year in college. And I had the privilege of shaking President Jimmy Carter's hand, and I will never forget that moment. And now I'm thrilled to be at Emory, where President Carter is a distinguished university professor, and where our partnership with the Carter Center is one of the most powerful ways that Emory's mission is carried around the world. And while we miss President Carter joining us tonight, we are excited to have his grandson, Jason Carter, with us tonight to carry out this Emory tradition. Now, not long ago, Jason had a conversation with his grandfather. And as part of that conversation, President Carter shared a special message to all of you, Emory's class of 2024, to receive tonight. So it is my pleasure to invite you now to watch a special video message to you from a man who has changed history, a winner of a Nobel Peace Prize, a leader whose human rights work around the world has brought lasting change to millions of people. And last but not least, a Georgia native. President Carter, thank you for your leadership and for your service to our nation.
This is going to be the 39th town hall, and people come up to me all the time and show me their tickets to the town hall from when they were freshmen at Emory, or they tell me that they were the one that introduced you. So it's become quite a tradition.
Well, yeah, I know. And I've enjoyed it most of the time.
What did you enjoy the most about it?
Well, the interrelationship between me and the students, of course, but what I didn't like was the unanticipated questions, because sometimes they were very embarrassing, and I gave the students a promise at the beginning that I would answer every question.
And some of them, did you come to regret that promise?
Yes, I did several times.
Out of the country's current challenges, what do you think would be the easiest one to fix, and what should that solution be?
We have one of the poorest democratic processes of elections in the world.
If you were president, what would you have done about the Snowden leaks?
I would have deplored it.
What is your advice to first-time voters in this presidential election?
Vote, and if you want to be like me, vote Democratic. If you want to be different from me, vote Republican. That's the only thing I can tell you.
One of the questions that we have is, going forward, they're going to have different people conduct this town hall. And the question is, should we keep that rule that you have to answer every single question?
Well, I kind of like the rule eventually, because it was very diverse and among the questions. And also the students enjoyed it, I think. And they knew that I was bound to answer every question, so they were unrestrained in asking the questions.
You've had tough interviews, but is there any interview that's been tougher than the Emory Town Hall?
I don't think so. I can certainly anticipate what the question would be from the news media, but the students' questions were unanticipated.
President Carter, is it the government's responsibility to make higher education affordable?
My own hope in the future is that the government will never get involved in trying to decide the quality of what's taught, or the subjects that are taught, or the priorities that are taught, but will do everything they can to make it possible for all qualified students, academically and determined by their ambition, to get a higher education, no matter what the wealth or social status or education might be of the students' parents.
If you could describe the U.S. in one word, what would it be?
searching.
Which actor would you want to play you in a movie?
I think Jon Stewart. I would like for Jon Stewart to play.
Crunchy or smooth?
I prefer crunchy more than I do smooth.
I am going to be the speaker this year. Do you have advice for me?
I would like to see the students be tough on you, like they were on me, and unrestrained in what kind of questions they ask. Don't avoid the questions and answer it forthrightly, just what you really feel.
One of the things that you said long ago, when I was a student at Duke and you spoke at my graduation, and then again, I was reading the 2001 town hall, which was right after September 11th. And you talked about in both those that the most important things in life are the things that you cannot see: justice, peace, humility, service, a willingness to forgive, compassion, sacrificial love. Those are the most important attributes of life. You talked about how strong the country is and how it will survive. And we're in this crazy moment again. A lot of people feel like we're, beset with this pandemic, with this real division in the country. And I'm wondering if you still feel the same faith in our country that you did in 2001.
Yes, I certainly do. If we could just get back to the president telling the truth, that would be enough for me.
I think if there is one message that I know you have lived by that comes across in these town halls, is to tell the truth.
That's right. I learned that basically from my father, who insisted that we tell the truth. But also at the Naval Academy, there was instant expelling midshipmen from the Naval Academy if there was any insinuation that the person answering a question from a professor or from a higher class midshipman, if you attempted to avoid the question or to tell a lie, you were instantly discharged.
Is there anything else, Papa, you wanted to make sure we talked about?
I think that I want to wish everybody there a successful approach to this academic year and to other facts in their life. And I think telling the truth is a foundation of all of the human rights that you share with one another. Thank all the students and the new president and Jason and everybody participating in this event. I really appreciate it. And I relish the chance to appear or to share some thoughts in this very limited way.
Thank you, President Fenves, and greetings to Jason Carter. I was moved watching the video, and I'm sorry if my voice breaks a little. It's moving to see President Carter and to hear from him and to hear his words inspire us again. I want to welcome all of our guests, especially members of the class of 2024. How special it is for you to be a part of this annual tradition, something to hold on to in this time where maybe it feels like there's not a lot to hold on to. We're delighted to have you with us now in this moment to carry on this tradition. Of course, I'm sure you know by now that this is not the only longstanding tradition that you will help to carry on during your time at Emory. There's so much that Emory offers and so much that people hold dear, and we hope that you will continue to participate and create communities in ways that are meaningful for you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our host, the president of Emory Student Government Association. Lori Steffel is a senior studying finance and consulting in Emory's Goizetta Business School. She's originally from Glenview, a suburb of Chicago. Lori is spending much of her senior year working virtually in the business school and serving as head moderator for Wonderful Wednesdays. After graduation, she plans to work for a securities firm in Atlanta. And just a word of gratitude to Lori and students that have been elected into roles across campus. You've shown tremendous leadership in these times. I know this isn't what you anticipated when you ran for office so many months ago, but Emory is greatly indebted for the work that you're doing to support the community. And I'm tremendously honored to work alongside you in this time, especially. Now, Lori will introduce our guest of honor, Jason Carter. I'll turn it over to SGA President Lori Steffel.
Thank you so much, Dean Galai, for that warm welcome. And I share your sentiments. The video was moving, and I'm so grateful to be here tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. So first, the chat function is turned off during this webinar, but please feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A function. But when submitting a question, please be sure to include your name, your class year, your school affiliation, and your hometown. We look forward to hearing from all of you. This year's question moderators are your fellow students, Grace Kessler and Christopher Wallen. They are both members of the Barclay Forum for Debate, Deliberation, and Dialogue. Grace is in the Emory College class of 2024. She was born and raised in Topeka, Kansas, and is planning to major in political science and economics. Christopher, also in the Emory College class of 2024, is from Coral Springs, Florida, and his intended majors are political science and history. Before we begin the town hall portion of tonight's event, I'd like to first extend my deepest gratitude to the Carter Center for their continued commitment to Emory students. This event is an incredible opportunity for our first years and remains a hallmark of the student experience at Emory. Thinking back on my own time here, now a senior, the Carter Center has had such a profound impact on my own experience. Of course, in addition to the annual Carter Town Hall that we have, my first year seminar class actually had the opportunity to visit the Carter Center and meet with former First Lady Rosalind Carter, who is an exceptional leader and now a personal role model. So to all of our first years watching, it is my sincere hope that you find opportunities to engage with the Carter Center during your time at Emory and witness firsthand the tremendously important work they do for our community and our world. On behalf of President Carter, who I'm sure would tell you this himself, as he has many times before, I strongly encourage all of you to apply to their internships. I'd now like to introduce our guest of honor this evening, Jason Carter. Born at Emory Hospital, Jason's a 9th generation Georgian and grandson of former President Jimmy Carter. Jason attended Duke University, where he obtained a Bachelor of Arts with a double major in philosophy and political science. After graduating from Duke, he served in the Peace Corps stationed in South Africa, following the example of his great-grandmother, Lillian Carter, who served in India. Jason later attended the University of Georgia School of Law, and in 2010, he was elected to represent Georgia's 42nd district in the state Senate. He went on to become the Democratic nominee for governor of Georgia in the 2014 election. Jason is currently a partner at the law firm of Bondurant, Mixon & Elmore in Atlanta. He has represented the National Football League Players Association and won the Stuart Eisenstadt Young Lawyer Award given by the Anti-Defamation League for his pro bono work defending voting rights. It's my great pleasure to now welcome Jason Carter.
Thanks so much, Lori. It's a great honor for me to be here. Or here being the 2020 version of here. My grandparents send their regards. I'm going to talk a little bit about them and a little bit about the work of the Carter Center. And then I'm looking forward to answering questions. And I will say that conversation with my grandfather that they just played, I appreciated Dean Galai and President Fenves for helping put it together and for it being moving. It was certainly moving for me too, having heard it again. And really, my grandfather poured his heart out in these town halls. He stood with the Emory community, felt embraced by the Emory community, and truly, gave a real, honest version of himself. When I was listening to the quotes from the prior town halls as this was getting ready to begin and hear him talk about the things that motivate him, the things that he's proud of. These really are, these town halls, a treasure trove of life lessons and of understanding that he brought. So for that, for my family and my children and the others, we appreciate Emory having given him the opportunity to participate in these over the years. I'll give you a quick update on both of them. They're doing great. My grandfather, if he were here, would detail every single health problem that he's having right now because he likes to be very open and honest. But he had a bad fall last year and had a subdural hematoma, which, as those of you who are in the many of you at Emory would know is a significant bleed and pressure in the brain. And so he's had to relearn to do a variety of sort of basic things. So he's getting around a lot less than he was. And he had to learn a variety of other things to do again, but he is up and at 'em these days. He's swimming every day and living at home in Plains, and calls me whenever he thinks the Carter Center is doing something that it shouldn't be or not doing enough. So I definitely get the interaction from him that we need. But for intents and purposes, they're happily retired from their work. And as you could see from the 2019 town hall, it took a lot to get them to really step back after their incredible run of service and participation in the world in really huge ways. And now I think they're very happy to be home in Plains and focusing on some things down there. My grandmother walks every day, and they're now setting up a variety of operations that they need to do. They've noticed that a couple of houses in Plains don't have the right kind of roof, and so they're raising money to get that fixed. So while they're staying home these days, they are not really slowed down, other than that their scope is now back in that hometown where they're from and where they've loved and lived for their whole lives. But aside from them, the other aspect, and I think one of the things that I'll talk about and then take any questions you have, obviously, the Carter Center, speaking of little towns, I think the way that the Carter Center has operated over the years is really reflective of my grandparents' values. The Carter Center's mental health program is now celebrating my grandmother's 50th year as an advocate for mental illness and for ending the stigma of mental illness and for having a holistic view of mental health and putting it on parity with physical health. And that, for this generation, for the class of 2024, certainly all of us, I think, understand the value of looking at mental health through that lens. But 50 years ago, when my grandmother started that, it was an incredible uphill battle. And the persistence that she has shown, and frankly, the track record that she has shown, is one remarkable aspect of the Carter Center. We also have peace programs that have been well known around the world in terms of democracy. In other places, we've observed 111 elections since 1989 in 39 different countries. We have human rights programs. We have programs devoted to dealing with one of the major issues in the world, as my grandfather described in one of the town halls, which is the discrimination and the abuse of women and girls. And our programs at the Carter Center are designed to lift up and provide full access to society and to ensure that women and girls are empowered with the tools that they need to be full participants in their communities. Because, as my grandfather mentioned, and as we believe, when women and girls are empowered to play important roles in their communities, the communities are, of course, far better off. We have a number of conflict resolution programs on the peace side of the Carter Center, and other pillars of peace that we discuss, rule of law, and those things that undergird the human rights that were really the story of my grandfather's life. In addition to those programs, and in addition to the mental health program, we have a broader public health arm of the Carter Center that is focused on disease eradication and prevention in a number of places, mostly in the poorest countries in the world. When we started, for example, tackling guinea worm disease more than 30 years ago, there was a category of diseases that we still call neglected tropical diseases. Back then, they were truly neglected. Now, we have built up an infrastructure that is tackling these diseases, again, in the poorest places in the world. The guinea worm eradication program is almost finished. We've had about a dozen people this year, humans that have contracted this ancient scourge, and those 12 people we hope will be the last to ever have this disease. It will become the second disease after smallpox ever eradicated from the face of the earth. And that is another of the remarkable aspects of the track record that my grandparents built at the Carter Center. Now, I'll say this, John Stewart, what is one of my grandfather's favorite people, mentioned the other day at an event for the Carter Center that he just couldn't understand how the Carter Center could possibly be relevant when what we were talking about was protecting democracy and ending diseases. It just didn't seem like a very 2020 thing to be doing, but we're going to keep doing it, hoping that those things become relevant again. As for me, and then I'll take questions, I have, as mentioned, I was in the state Senate. I represented Emory University for several years in the Georgia State Senate. And I ran for governor here in Georgia in 2016. And one of the sort of crazy things, I'm 45 years old, and I feel like my political career occurred in a different era. So many things have changed in the last 4 years. About the way we treat each other, about the way that our country feels about itself, about the way that our country looks out at the world. That I think it really is almost unrecognizable in some ways. But as we've watched that, as we have experienced it, at least for me, I have been looking toward this next generation of individuals, including you in the class of 2024, to push forward and really bring us and show us more clearly than we've ever been shown before what our country is and what it can mean in the world. So I look forward to your questions. If you hear my children or my dogs, it's 2020. I apologize, nothing I could do about it. But I'm looking forward to the questions. And despite my grandfather's advice to you to go hard on me, I would ask for at least a little bit of sympathy, because it is virtually impossible to fill my grandfather's shoes. And so while I won't try to do that, I do look forward to the questions that you all have tonight. And I'm excited to be here to continue this remarkable tradition where we've carved out a place that is a place where whoever it is that's going to stand in this place will have to answer every question and tell the truth. And if we can get our leaders to do that, as my grandfather mentioned, we'd go a long way towards resolving a lot of the problems that we have in the world. So with that, I appreciate it. I look forward to hearing from Grace and Chris.
It's truly an honor to be able to ask you these questions that were submitted. The first question comes from Gabriel Arnoldson Crawford from the class of 2024, who's majoring in Russian. And Gabriel asks, what are ways for students to become more active participants in the democratic process?
So I think everyone has an opportunity. This is an important question, and this is a strange moment, right? This is a difficult and new way of engaging in the democratic process. Number one, of course, is vote. That is the baseline on which we build every aspect of our democracy. Number two, I think is to be engaged and involved in practicing good information hygiene, right? Make sure that when we are looking out at what's happening in the world, that we're curating those stories in a way that is going to be positive and helpful. If you see misinformation, if you see people talking about stuff that's not true, make sure that you call people on it, but also make sure you become a truth teller. I think one of the most important aspects that we've seen in the movements for justice lately in the United States, sort of this iteration of this sort of lifetime of this country's struggle, is the ability of individuals who are witnessing events, who are witnessing things, to take that witness, to bear that witness out, and to let people know. So I think really that's an important way to engage. And I think the last thing I'll say, we have to find better ways to talk in this country. We have to find better ways to engage with people who disagree with us. We have to find better ways to bring people together in a public square, to have legitimate discussions about how to tackle the issues that we have. And so creating spaces where you can engage with people, in addition to curating information, in addition to the baseline of voting and getting involved, is to, when we have these discussions, do our best to make spaces for other people, to bring them in, understand where they're coming from, and use that as a way to break down barriers rather than put them up. My 2 cents.
All right. This question comes from Rebecca Schwartz, class of 2024, majoring in political science and economics. Do you have any advice for college students interested in pursuing a career in politics?
Yeah, my advice is do it. My advice is pursue it. My advice is incredibly important, I think, for good people to get involved, right? There's a lot of people who get involved in politics because they're ambitious, because they want to be somebody. And we need more people who want to get involved in politics because they want to do good. And that their goal is to make sure that we're building that community that I described before, that is there for everyone, that is ready to support and build, take down the divides that we have. And so I would say, get involved. I did it. I ran for office when I was in my early 30s. I was elected to the state Senate, and people are excited to see young people get engaged. And so when you show up at events, when you show up in politics as a young person, you will be recognized. You will be listened to, and people need to hear your voice. So, I mean, my advice is just do it.
This next question is one that we received from social media. And the question asks, or says, you've spoken in depth about the different impacts that both of your grandfathers have had on you. What would you say is the most important lesson that you've learned from each of them?
the way my grandfather put it in one of the Emory town halls is that we underestimate the value and the abilities of people who live in poverty. My grandparents, both of them, came from a tiny little town with 600 people in the middle of nowhere. I mean, if you haven't been to Plains, Georgia, you'll miss it if you drive through it, except for the Jimmy Carter signs, right? But it is 600 people. A lot of them were living on less than $1 a day when my grandfather lived there in the 1920s. And what that has meant for us, just to give the example of the Carter Center, is that when we go to a village in Mali, the middle of nowhere, some of the poorest places in the world, and my grandparents look at that village of 600 people that has an ancient disease. And many people from the United States or elsewhere look at that and they say, oh, this is a place we send pity. And my grandparents look at it and they say, no, I know those people. I was that person. I look at a 600 person village in southern Mali, and I think that's a community that can change itself. There's people in that community that are good and smart and love each other and want to do better. And if we give them the tools and the resources that they need, they can change the world. And that's literally how guinea worm disease was eradicated from the face of the planet, when it, soon to be eradicated. Because there's no medicine, there was no specific medical treatment. There was really an education of people who had to change the way they collected their water. If you filter your water and everybody in the community does it, you will eliminate guinea worm disease from your community. And what the Carter Center did in every single one of those little villages, where again, other people look and see nothing but poverty. The Carter Center went into those places along with those people, recognizing the power of those people and said, hey, this is how we can change this. And those people in every single one of those little villages are the ones who are going to achieve one of the greatest public health successes in the history of the world. And so that belief in the power of individual people, no matter how rich or poor they are, to make a change in their own life is what I learned from my grandfather. And he told me from my own self, when I was, in fact, just graduated from college, I said, Papa, what do you know who I am and what I've done. You tell me, what do you think I should do? And he said, I think you should join the Peace Corps. And I did. And I saw that same ability and that same remarkable faith in their own community in the tiny towns and the tiny village where I lived in the Peace Corps. And so that's the lesson to me of these two people, from Plains, Georgia.
This one is from Anusha Panjwani, class of 2024. What are your thoughts on the current polarization in America, and how can we as a country recover?
So my thoughts on the current polarization are that it's sad. My thoughts are that it's tearing us apart. And I think there are so many aspects of our politics that are broken. And that breakage is what is causing really this polarization. I think number one, we have this representative democracy that elects representatives in a way that's completely broken because we do it in these gerrymandered districts. And so the voice of our politics tends to be from either one extreme or the other. And so I think number one, that political discourse that is so painful to observe and that polarization that's so difficult is embedded in the system right now. And we've got to have reform to that system. Good people who get elected and who attain power have to use that power to, again, break down these walls that are dividing people. We also have just tended to sort of scurry into our partisan corners in real ways. And the divide between rich and poor is one. The divide between urban and rural is one. We obviously have racial polarization in a number of our different communities. And so those things that pull us apart are real. But I do believe that when you look at who people are and how people interact with each other, Democrats or Republicans, outside the context of our broken politics, I think you see a lot more human connection. I think you see a lot more people who participate in each other, who go to their kids' soccer matches, who show up at things together to do good work for their communities. And I just think we have to do our best on the one hand, to reform the politics, and on the other hand, to recognize the things that do bring us together. Because I think in a lot of ways, there are so many of those that get lost in the political discourse because they aren't exciting or sexy, or they don't show up at the polls, but they're there, and they're as much a part of our community as that polarized political force. And I hope I'll get another question about that, because we can talk about political polarization all night, but it's an important moment But we have to look at it for what it is. And yes, we have a broken political system in many, many ways, but we also have communities that are a lot less broken than the politics.
This next question is from Ryan Gibbons from the class of 2024, majoring in political science and quantitative sociology. And Ryan says that today many of us feel like we're struggling, be it in our political landscape or on campus. It can feel almost as if we're drowning and if our hopeful voices are simply lost. What advice do you have for us?
Number one, you're not alone, right? I mean, all of us in many ways feel like we are drowning. And I think that's a good way of saying it. I have said throughout this pandemic that I just sort of feel like, there's so many things that I love that make me happy that I just don't do anymore. We're not all together tonight. I mean, we are virtually, but we're not. And so much of that, it just weighs on you. And so don't feel like you shouldn't be sad. Don't feel like this is not a difficult moment, because it is a difficult moment. And so just know that you're not alone in that fear or sadness or depression or whatever you want to call it. But at the same time, just remember that a lot of this stuff will pass. Certainly, the ability to come together physically and to be around each other and to go back to the things that we love to do and to experience your college, experience in the way that you want to, you will have that opportunity, right? It may take some time, and we'll also find other ways to have the human connection that we have. But as far as the hopefulness for the future, I think, as my grandfather put it in the intro, there's just as much reason for faith now as there's ever been. Our democracy right now is being tested in many ways. Our communities are being tested in many ways, but there's no doubt that we're meeting the test. There's no doubt that no matter what happens in this election or whatever happens with respect to the pandemic, we're going to come out the other side. And the question is going to be, how is it that we do that? And what have we done in the meantime to build the kind of communities and the kind of connections that we want to have when we get on the other side of this? Just to give a quick example, the conflict in Syria has been intractable. But what the Carter Center has been doing over this decade of just horrible loss, where the despair that we feel going to Emory in Atlanta is one thing, but if we were living in Syria right now, it's a totally different and much more hopeless feeling. But the Carter Center has just been building connections, and every single place you go, no matter where it is in the world, we have always found people willing to put their hands together and to rebuild the communities that have been taken apart. And so just know that that's really the fundamental human condition, is one that looks forward to the future, that protects each other, that comes together after things come apart and builds them back together. So I've seen it, I believe it, and we're all in it together. So thank you for the question.
This question is from Catherine Wang, class of 2024 from San Diego, California, studying philosophy. What's the most productive way to engage with people that we disagree with?
I think the most productive way to engage with people that you disagree with is to listen, but also to understand that your goal is ultimately, right, to at least understand. You don't have to persuade them necessarily, because maybe they're never going to persuade them, but it is important to understand. And to me, I was a Democrat in the Georgia legislature for, the years I was down there, completely dominated by Republicans, and they were doing things I thought was wrong. They were doing things that I thought were, frankly, horribly wrong, immoral sometimes. And so we would go down there and debate a bill about immigration. And I would look at people in the eye and say, I can't imagine why you're doing this. And for some of those people, they would just shut off. And they would be like, well, you're different than me. But there was a lot of people down there who, when we were talking about something that was fundamentally important to me, they would say, here's what I'm coming from. And whenever we had that moment where we could at least recognize that the other person was a human being and wasn't just somebody who was a hateful demagogue, for example, then you can build that human connection and you can build from there. I mean, I've got friends now who feel like they can't go home for Thanksgiving because their parents are Trump supporters or whatever, or their grandparents. You've got a human connection with those people. You can't let the things that you disagree about tear you apart. At the same time, I got to say one other thing. There are certain viewpoints that don't belong in our public discourse, right? Hard to draw that line. But if you're talking about white supremacy, for example, as an ideology, that's the kind of person that you've got to really confront. And it doesn't have to be with violence. It doesn't have to be in ways that are going to be counterproductive, but you've got to find a way to help that person out. And I think that, I just saw a documentary. I've got a friend who was in the Ku Klux Klan, in Ringgold, Georgia, and became an incredibly close friend with a refugee from Clarkston because they were able to find that human connection. And once you see that kind of a story, you realize that there's humans on all sides of those political discourses, on all sides of those ideological divides. And it's a remarkable endeavor, but it's tough, but just stick with it.
This next question is from Sid Wen, class of 2024, majoring in neuroscience and behavioral biology from Boston. And Sid asks, what in your opinion is the greatest challenge facing Georgia and America as a whole today?
So first of all, these are all hard questions. Like, I thought I was going to get asked if I liked crunchy peanut butter or whatever, but that's what they were asking last time. No, the biggest challenge that I think is facing Georgia and America right now, I think you've got global challenges, right? We have to take action on the environment, as my grandfather said in the introduction. We have to do that. That is the baseline of ensuring that we have a place that we can habitate, right? We've got to do that. So we have to tackle the environmental issues that are there. And then I think we have to tackle the divisions that are there. To me, the divisions begin with education and with poverty and the sort of the systemic poverty that exists, frankly, in certain communities in Georgia. And also what we forget sometimes is the difference between rural Georgia and elsewhere. You've got divisions that are almost as stark between rural and urban as you do between races in certain parts of the state. And so there's a lot that has to be done to bring people together and to ensure that people are getting the kind of educational opportunities that they need and the type of sort of the ability to tackle these generational inequalities that have now become a part of the fundamental fabric of our society. I think it's wrong. I think that we have to address it. And I think that when that manifests itself as the type of injustice that we see when people are getting killed in the streets because of the color of their skin, or people are feeling the kind of divisions that the other questions have asked about, we've got to address that, because if we don't, then that poses the greatest threat, I think, to our country and to its leadership in the world. And what I think is fundamentally important about getting it right in a place like Georgia is that this really is a microcosm for the rest of the United States. We've got everything here that we need in order to be successful as a state and to be a powerhouse in various ways. But we have to tackle those issues. And the same thing is true for the United States. And when you travel the world and look at the way that other people talk about human rights and democracy, the United States is the beacon. And if that beacon gets faded, if that beacon loses its luster, then you're really talking about problems throughout the rest of the world. And I think we've got to reverse that very, very quickly.
This is from Tori Jordan, class of 2024 from San Antonio, Texas. What's your most memorable experience from your time serving in the Peace Corps?
So when I was in the Peace Corps, Nelson Mandela was the president, and South Africa was going through this post-apartheid moment, and they were engaging in what I call the post-apartheid struggle, right? There was this long struggle against apartheid, and then it ended sort of almost overnight because of a variety of negotiations and all these other things, and they had an election. But my most memorable moment, I would say, I got to meet Nelson Mandela with my grandfather, which was, of course, incredible to sit in a room with two people who got engaged in politics, who lived their lives in service, and who did it without compromising their values, without, while telling the truth, while doing the things that sometimes when you're in politics, you think, can I achieve what I want to achieve in politics without compromising in many ways? Well, those two guys are examples of proof, in essence, that it can be done. But that was memorable. But for me, it was really the election that I observed in my little town. There was about 1,200 registered voters. They voted at the high school. Everyone where I lived, carried their water from the river and built their houses out of sticks and mud. But they showed up on election day. And I think there were 1,270 people. This was to elect the second Black president of South Africa. It was the end of Nelson Mandela's presidential term. And folks were bringing their grandmother in wheelbarrows. But of the 1,270 people, I think 1,185 or something showed up to vote. And those 15 who didn't show up, some of them had passed away during the time period. I mean, they were like seriously incapacitated. Otherwise, they were there because they knew that voice mattered so much and it had been denied for so long. And when I think about John Lewis, who of course was a great hero of mine and a friend of mine, and he says to go out and vote like you've never voted before. I didn't know exactly what that meant when he said it, but the way I understand it for me is I watched those people in South Africa vote like they'd never voted before. And it's a respect and an understanding and a celebration of what democracy can mean. And it just was thrilling for me to see it with the people that I knew and had spent so much time with, to see how much respect they had for that process and for what it brings to their community. And it makes me think our elections are a lot sadder than that, but hopefully we'll turn that around here in the coming weeks.
This next question is from Jose Marino, class of 2024 from Dallas, Texas. And Jose asks, what advice do you have for students that have a difficult time deciding on a career path?
I think that, honestly, when I was in college, I had a difficult time deciding on a career path too. And the number one thing you should know is don't feel like you got to figure it out now, right? I mean, I've been out of college for X number of years, and the number of friends that I have that are in the same job they took out of college is almost zero. In fact, I have one friend, and I'll tell you what he does. When he left Duke, he went to NFL Films, and he started making football movies. And he loves football, and he loved the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he got that job, and he's had 15 or 20 Emmys since then, winning awards for making football movies. Everybody else has changed jobs, right? For me, honestly, the advice that my grandfather gave me was perfect. And it was go to the Peace Corps. And the reason that it was good, and I would just recommend this for everybody, what it did for me is it gave me a moment after college to sort of remove myself from the community that I was in and all of the various different blinders that we wear when we're going through this, and you see your friends and they're interviewing for these jobs or they're taking the MCAT or whatever they're doing. And it gave me a chance to just be with myself, to reflect on who I was, to reflect on what my community was like from afar, and to look back and really ground myself in what I wanted to do. And I'll say this, I took the LSAT before I went to the Peace Corps. And I said, look, I'm going to go to the Peace Corps to decide, convince me not to go to law school. And I went to the Peace Corps, and I saw the things that you could do with a law degree, and it solidified my belief that that's what I wanted to do. But it could have very well gone the other way. So I think the key is take your time and take some time for yourself to reflect on who you are and what you want to do, and then get going. And don't be in a rush to go out and get that first thing and get it right, because it's probably going to change.
You've touched on challenges facing Georgia, and it leads into a question we received from social media. Are there areas where Georgia can lead the United States towards a better future?
I think the answer to that is absolutely. And not only are there places, but I think Georgia has the greatest opportunity, frankly, of anywhere else. I mean, this is the cradle of the civil rights movement. This is the place where we have, become the champions of voting rights, and what has been overcome in Georgia. The racism of our past, the slave owners of our past, including in my family, have grown up and generations later become leaders to secure voting rights. Have become leaders to ensure that we're building bridges between races, that we sure that we are charging into the future with respect to so many other aspects of this, that we are able to put that history behind us and move forward. That's, again, a microcosm for what our nation needs, right? We've got leadership in this state, we've got resources in this state, and yet we still are beset with the same problems that I think are the fundamental problems of our society globally, but in the United States in particular, which are, racial discrimination, a history of voter suppression, gaps between the rich and poor. And if we can confront those problems with the kind of historical legacy that we share as a state, as the state of, if you'll allow me, Martin Luther King and John Lewis and frankly Jimmy Carter, we have that tradition, and we've got leaders now that are willing to do that. And we've got the resources to put behind it. We've got institutions like Emory and Georgia Tech and the University of Georgia, and frankly, Georgia Southern and so many others that can be there to drive us into the future. And I think this is where it's going to happen. I really do. I've thought that for a long time, and I'm proud to be from here. And this is a place where that stuff is happening. And I think you will see that leadership come more from this state, with Stacey Abrams and Keisha Lance Bottoms, and I could go on with just the number of African-American women who are leading the country right now from this town almost. It's remarkable, and we could expand it to all kinds of other people as well. So I think we've got the resources, we've got everything we need, and I really do believe that this is the kind of place that's going to help this country and the world charge through the problems that we have. But we've got to recognize them, and we've got to be willing to confront them. So I'm fired up about it, obviously.
This next question is from Samir Aji, class of 2024, political science major from here in Atlanta. And they ask, what do you miss most from your time as a state senator?
What do I miss most? Well, I think there is a real, I miss the people. I almost said nothing, frankly. My honest answer, probably like nothing. I don't miss anything from my time in the state senate. I guess I miss having a voice that is sort of an automatic voice on some of these issues. But I have the benefit of being able to speak out on issues now. But I do miss the people. There's a great number of people down there that are trying to do good. A lot of my good friends who are Republicans that I see a lot less because they're continuing to be busy. But I loved it. I enjoyed it. I had a good time when I was down there, but it was also really tough. And it was also a really difficult moment to be confronting some of the issues that we were confronting back then. But again, it seems like it was a totally different political era compared to sort of the kind of stuff that's going on in our politics now. So I think that I think I answered that honestly when I said I don't miss much, but I do have a lot of friends down there that I miss. And I wish, and I'm glad that my colleagues that are there now, the person who represents Emory now is a woman named Elena Parent, who's a fantastic representative and who's doing a lot of good work. So she carries my voice there in many ways, or speaks on my behalf. And I still get to comment when I want to. So I think I do pretty good without the state senate.
This question is from Guanyu Chen, class of 2024 from Nanjing, China. What's your advice for freshmen?
Take the time to take your university's time seriously. You've got so many resources here. You've got so many different things to experience that you should experience as many as you can. You've got, don't get caught in a sort of a tiny group of people and spend all your time there. Make sure that you get out and get the full benefit of what Emory has to offer. And I know this is a weird time to try to do that because of the restrictions that are put on all of us by the pandemic. But I think that if you take advantage of all of the opportunities that you have at Emory, you will come out of it with an absolutely incredible experience. Because just living down the street from Emory and being around and knowing the kind of opportunities that are provided throughout that community, it's really, really remarkable. And, if you take it seriously and you decide you're going to get the most out of it that you can, I think you won't have any regrets.
This next question is from Kira Dyson, and they asked, what is a memorable or funny story that your grandfather told you about his time in the White House?
Funny story that my grandfather told me about his time in the White House. So number one, there's like a ton of funny stories. Like he's a super funny guy. People, and I know that came across in some of these old town halls, but he's like essentially a jokester and does a bunch of tricks and things like that. But I think my funniest memory from being at the White House is there was a snowman building contest, and me and Amy, my Aunt Amy is about 10 years older than me. And she was, 12 or 13 or 14, and I was 4 or 5. And that math's bad, but don't hold me to that. She and I were going to enter into this snowman building competition, and we loaded up. We built this beautiful snowman and did all this stuff. And they said, you have to put your name on it. And so we went to put our name on it and realized that and there was kids from all over Washington who they'd invited to the White House lawn for this thing. We realized they were never going to let us win because it was Amy Carr. There was no way we were going to win. And so we ended up snatching the name tag off and changing it and making up some other funny name. I don't even remember what it was, and putting it back on the snowman, but we still didn't win. But I just remember that as a funny occurrence. I can't tell you anything else funny. The thing that my friends think is the funniest is that my grandfather just recently was quoted as talking about how one of his children smoked weed with Willie Nelson on the roof of the White House. So maybe that'll get a rise out of people, but I thought it was funny.
Okay, then Mr. Carter, who is a leader that inspires you?
So the most inspirational leader I've ever met, I met in the Peace Corps. And her name is Selina Nzugulu. And she lived her whole life constrained by apartheid. She was a Black woman. She was born in a hospital for Black people. She was educated in apartheid schools that taught her specific jobs that she should do. The reading comprehension in apartheid schools were about being a maid or about working in a mine, because they were trying to teach people to live in apartheid. She grew up in that place. She was a maid for a white family. She worked at a sweater factory. In 1975, they forcibly removed her from her house in Pretoria, in the townships, a Black township outside Pretoria, and rode her out in a bus and dropped her off on the side of the road, basically, in this place, and said, this is her homeland. And I got there 23 years later, and she was the head of she had a women's gardening project that had gotten an award from the United Nations. She was the head of the school governing body, like the school board. She was the postmaster. She had a dressmaker there that she had for other people. She owned this general store. She had a bunch of cows. She had a preschool that she had 25 or 30 kids in, that she fed them 3 times a day, taught them English and math, and just did all that she possibly have done for her community. And I rented a room from her. She was the person I lived with in the Peace Corps, with her and her family. And every single night there would be a different person at our table who would show up, and we'd say, oh, hey, Raby, come on in, and they wouldn't say why they were there or anything else. We just assumed that they needed a meal. And so she lived her life for her community, despite it being constrained by apartheid, despite if anybody in this room saw her, in this Zoom saw her, they would think she was poor. And all I think about is, what would she have done if she had been Jimmy Carter's grandson? Or if she'd gotten to go to Emory, right? If she was in the class of 2024 and being born today instead of being born in South Africa in 1950. It's an amazing experience to see somebody like that. She's the most successful grandparent I've ever had. Definitely.
I guess, given the importance of the upcoming election, something I'd like to know is, if someone told you that they weren't going to vote, what would you say to at least attempt to persuade them to vote?
I would ask why. I mean, I think you got to start there, but I think ultimately you're talking about a moment in history where people are going to look back on this election, and they're going to look back on it, and you're going to tell your kids and say, how did you vote in that election? And I have my kids ask me now about how I voted in certain elections in the past, and I'm proud to tell them what I did. And someday, when people look back on this election, if there's folks that didn't come out to vote, you're gonna feel like you missed out. You're gonna feel like this moment was one where you're supposed to stand up and be counted, one way or the other. And I just think it's too important not to. And I think it's on some level, for me, it's about taking this democracy for granted in a way that's inappropriate, frankly, in a way that, you benefit so much from living in this country, from the things that this country means to the world. And that's true no matter where you're from. That to not participate, to not do your part, to not step up, to me, it's almost irresponsible. But I probably would talk too long, and I'd probably do a bad job of answering that first question about what to do when somebody disagrees with you. But that's where I would start.
Thanks for your time tonight, Mr. Carter. We have time for one last question. In your time in politics, what accomplishment are you most proud of, and what do you hope to do next to address the challenges of the current moment?
The thing I'm most proud of from my time in politics is driving the discussion in this state about both immigration and education. We we're so constrained in our ability to get anything done as Democrats in a Republican-dominated legislature that, there were times where I knew that we could build coalitions, and where we did build coalitions, bipartisan coalitions, to do the right thing in different contexts on education and immigration, and where I was able to lead those bipartisan groups in the state Senate, and just to demonstrate that you could make a coalition of urban Democrats and rural Republicans who could come together and say our schools are too important to mess around with them in this way, or it's too important for us to recognize the humanity of the people that work on farms to put immigration policy the way that they were trying to do it in those days. And so that's crucially important to me as far as what we've done in the past. For me right now, what's next? This moment in the Carter Center's history is a really important one for us. We are focusing for the first time on a U.S. election. We are focusing on the issues that I addressed before. We're going through a number of transitions at the center. As I mentioned, my grandparents' retirement is one of those transitions. And so I have been focusing my time on the Carter Center and the ability to take the track record and the legacy that my grandparents built and apply it and move it forward to the challenges that the world's facing. And I think that's a good platform for me right now. I also think that, frankly, I'm a super privileged white guy. And this is a moment where I think people like me can do a lot by not running for office and by looking at the really incredible people that we have in this state who are ready to step up and to represent voices that haven't been involved in politics before. And I think that's something that I have been taking a real proactive role in encouraging people and engaging with people who are interested in public life and trying to support them to get out and do that. And so that's my plan for right now. But I don't know what the world's going to look like in 2 weeks. And I think that one of the fundamental truths is that we're going to wake up, maybe in mid-November. Who knows how long it's going to take to get the results of this particular election. But we're going to wake up in mid-November and we're going to be in a different place. And so, knowing, planning what comes next is always difficult in that context. But this has been a wonderful experience for me. And I appreciate y'all letting me be the first person to follow my grandfather at this Emory Town Hall. And I certainly think this tradition is a worthy one. And just want to say thank you for the time, and thank you to President Fenves and Dean Gulai and both you two, Grace and Chris. Just it's been nice to interact, and I hope that we can stay in touch and hope to see many of you come through the doors of the Carter Center over the next several years.
Okay, well, I'd like to ask Grace and Chris to stay on, and of course, Jason. So first of all, to Emory's class of 2024, I can see what an outstanding group of young people you are just by the questions that you've asked. And you are going to get a great education here at Emory, and you are going to be prepared. We are going to be so proud when you graduate from Emory and go on to change the world. And look at our examples, Grace and Chris, your poise, your demeanor, the way you're engaging with our special guest here tonight. Thank you for moderating your class's questions. And Jason, first of all, send Emory's regards to your grandparents, and let your grandfather know that you have carried on the Carter Town Hall tradition in an admirable way, and that the tradition will continue. And on behalf of Emory University, thank you so much for being with the class of 2024 today. And we just are so appreciative of carrying on Emory's tradition of the Carter Town Hall. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm honored. I really am.
All right. Good night, everybody.